Hello, it's Steve Davenport, and I'm here with Clem Miller, and we're here to talk about the oral arguments in front of the Supreme Court regarding tariffs. The tariffs issue has come to the forefront and made this last 6 to 9 months more than we ever wanted to know about how much is traded with which countries and which ones are taking advantage of us. So I've been looking at this and I don't think it's really legitimate that the tariffs were imposed in a way related to the Emergency Act and that there's some kind of a national emergency or something that needs reaction from us in order to promulgate these tariffs. What do you think, Clem? Where do you think the tariff discussion is going, is now and will be in the future?
So today, the Supreme Court had oral arguments on the tariffs case, and these oral arguments went on for hours, hours of discussion. And I mean, much longer than I anticipated they would. Ate up a lot of my day, actually. And I would say that there was a great deal of skepticism on the part of, I don't know, almost everybody on the Supreme Court about these tariffs. And let me put that skepticism into sort of several buckets. First of all, there's the bucket that, you know, are are tariffs actually a remedy for are tariffs actually a remedy under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act? That act has never been used before to justify tariffs. It's been used to
What,
justify economic sanctions.
well,
Uh,
wasn't there some tariffs on steel that was used as part
okay,
of this?
well, steel is a different thing. Steel is under 232. Okay, so there's several. So Steve, there's several different tariff authorities out there. One tariff authority says that you can apply, I think it's 301, right? That you can apply tariffs basically in a sort of a tit for tat basis, right? If somebody is dumping, you can apply an anti-dumping countervailing duty, right? So that's sort of case by case, product by product, country by country,
Hmm.
which is, of course, not the case with Trump's tariffs. Or there's another one, Section 232, which is an act that says that for national security related purposes, you can apply tariffs to commodities that are national security. So that's applied to steel and aluminum. And while Trump could try to have Section 232 apply to everything, call everything national security, that would be a huge stretch, and I think would invite its own challenges, right? So instead, what Trump tried to do is use this International Economic Powers Act, which is used for things like sanctions on Russia, sanctions on Iran, trying to prevent people from, individuals from violating sanctions, like importing oil out of Russia and so on, trying to use that as a justification for tariffs. And the key argument uh, at the Supreme Court today was, are tariffs really a revenue generating device, primarily or exclusively, or can the tariff function be considered to be ancillary and tariffs be considered to be a legitimate use of the emergency powers in a foreign policy sense? So, the Trump argument is, well, we're not really trying to collect revenue, right? It would be great if we could do things without even collecting revenue. This is the Trump argument. But we're really using this to advance our foreign policy objectives.
I'm
And,
not sure.
and
I
the,
get
the, the problem
is
with
the
that,
objective to upset your foreign policy? I
yeah,
mean, can you have
exactly.
a negative objective? I
Right.
mean, does the court approve things that are
Right.
negatively skewed?
Right.
Like if
And
you eliminate rights for
you
people,
know,
is
and
that
is it really an emergency if you're applying tariffs across the world to almost everybody, including countries with which the US has trade surpluses, like
correct?
Switzerland?
If we were at war, or if there was a world war and we needed to do this across the board because these people, like, I agree. I also look at it and say, the unemployment rate may have ticked up 0.1%, but I'm not sure we're in an economic culture, crisis because of the market being at all-time highs.
Right.
I'm not sure
So,
we're in a financial one
right.
because rates are coming down.
So one of the justices said, well, maybe maybe we were, maybe we come under a different government, which is much more mindful of climate change than this one is. And they say, oh, the climate provides a serious economic emergency. Therefore, we're going to put tariffs on countries that generate, too much carbon. Would this justify it? And they had to say, yeah, this would, under the Trump, arguments, that would be justified to put tariffs on countries that generate too much carbon. And certainly, who wants to give that kind of authority to the president, right? The other
Right.
thing, the other thing that was brought up, and this was Gorsuch who said this, was that, the peculiar way in which this whole Emergency Powers Act is set up is that the Congress can take back a particular executive order that under the Economic Powers Act that the president has signed. They can take it back. They would have to vote. Both houses have to vote. But that particular taking back of that power also is subject to a presidential veto. That means that the House and the Senate would have to have a veto-proof majority to be able to pull back that power.
Wow.
Right? So in other words, the president would have powers to apply tariffs to almost everything, and Congress wouldn't have the ability to pull it back. So that was a concern of Justice Gorsuch in looking at this. But the bigger issue is the one of, tariffs are a revenue generating device. Historically, in the Constitution, the power to tariff is is given to Congress to do, and it's not given to the president. Congress can delegate some things to the president and has passed laws that say, look, under these narrow conditions, like I mentioned, the national security commodities like steel and aluminum, and also to level the playing field in certain products. You can use them in those cases, but it's subject to strict scrutiny and you have to do studies and this kind of thing. You just can't, whip out a blackboard and and
Start listing countries.
and start listing countries. You can't just do that, right? It's kind
I
of
mean,
random.
does,
So,
does does they talk at all about the significance of some of these tariffs? Because to me, I understand the concept of what he's trying to do. I understand the frustration of some countries who don't treat us well in terms of an equal opportunity. But I don't understand why we spend time talking about Vietnam
yeah.
when in reality, like, is there any rule of significance that you got to say to yourself, the president is overstepping his bounds
Oh
because
yeah.
these
No,
things
no,
don't have economic significance to the
that was
country.
that was all over the discussion today. The issue of how much, does he really have the power to apply tariffs across the board to everybody under this argument that there's some kind of emergency? Like, where's the emergency? Is it yeah, even with this, even if you call a trade deficit an emergency, which is an enormous stretch because no past president has ever applied tariffs under the Emergency Powers Act, much less for reasons of a trade deficit. Um, even if you use that, they applied tariffs also to countries with which we have trade surpluses.
Right.
So it's just and not only on top of that, Trump has there have been occasions where Trump has kind of whimsically applied tariffs in a random way, like saying, "Oh, we didn't like what the Brazilian Supreme Court did in ruling against the former president Bolsonaro, so I'm going to apply tariffs because we didn't like what the Supreme Court of Brazil did." That has absolutely nothing to do with anything really. And
Right. Well, I think there's one a question of significance, and then there's a question of scope, and then there's a question of, is this even under his authority? And I'd say that the part that I understood from most of my experience with steel was I think there are times when a president needs to act, and he doesn't necessarily need to get approval from Congress. If some
right.
companies
Well,
or
he has
economies,
approval. He has
I
approval
know he has approval
when
for
it
a strict usage of something that has national significance, but
right.
these don't these don't grow to that. Like, can you tell me which things you think are most out of line? Is it the reach? Is it the magnitude? Is it what do you think the court will say? He's not even close in terms of the reason for action, or he's not close in terms of how much revenue it would generate that it will cause this kind of uncertainty. Like, where do you think the court will?
I think the court's going to come down and say that if there has been a grant of tariff authority, then the president can use the grant of tariff authority. And right now, there's no grant
So
of
that's
tariff.
unrestricted.
Well, within whatever provisions are included in that grant of tariff authority. In 232 and in 338, they actually have to do some homework, right? In order to justify those tariffs. It may not be a great deal of homework, but they have to do some homework in order to justify the 232 and the 301, I should say, tariffs, right?
Yeah.
Um, so so I think, but those aren't an issue today. An issue today is trying to wedge tariffs into this International Emergency Powers Act, which is really meant for sanctions. And there was one sort of side discussion, which was kind of interesting, that Amy Coney Barrett was saying, well, under the Emergency Powers Act, there's this provision for issuing licenses. And could Trump just just charge fees for licenses and and do that instead of tariffs? I mean, can he do a tariff under a different name, a license fee? And there was some discussion about that, and I don't think even the lawyers did a lot of homework on that. It was a lawyer for one of the it was a lawyer uh for somebody who submitted a friend of the court brief, amicus brief, who said correctly, and I know a little bit about economic sanctions from the course I teach, and and they don't charge fees for these licenses. These licenses are exceptions from sanctions or from export controls or whatnot, and they don't charge. The purpose is not to raise revenue. The purpose of these licenses is so that the U.S. can decide whether a good is humanitarian, right, and should be allowed to go to Iran or Cuba or whatnot because it's a humanitarian thing. Like, let's say a hurricane sweeps across Cuba, we'll make exceptions in order to provide food and health supplies and so on to Cuba.
Yeah.
And that's what licenses are for, right? We're not selling licenses as an alternative form of tariff. So that was kind of an
Well,
interesting
we're not yet, but we could be in the future.
right.
I mean, what do you think is the next step? Like, if I'm an investor and I've got to look at this issue, what's the next step, the time frame, and how would it ultimately, let's say it was struck down by the court, or let's say it was limited by the court to only countries or economies that are over a certain size or have significance. What do you think the impact is for investors?
Well, I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a rollback of these tariffs. And in fact, one of the issues that came up today was what happens if we rule against the tariffs? Is that going to be a mess if we have to do if the U.S. government has to pay back the importers who paid these tariffs? How much of a disaster is that going to be? And so there was there was discussion about whether that would be a mess or not. Not that that's going to be determinative. You know, they're not going to make a decision based on whether there's a mess or not, right? But
Right.
they wanted to know like how much of a problem would it be? And you know, somebody said, well, you could say from now on, it would be a mess.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, somebody pointed out that you know, at a lower court hearing, the Trump administration said, "Oh, we'll have no problem giving back the tariffs if the Supreme Court rules otherwise." So they pointed that
Really?
out too, that the government actually said that reimbursement would be possible. You know, I think it probably would be. Another person, another lawyer pointed out, maybe it was the same lawyer pointed out that there have been tariffs in the past that have been reversed, and there's been no problem, you know, reimbursing those tariffs. So I think, yeah,
Hmm.
would that be a mess? Yeah, it would be a mess. But I think it would happen. This
I
reimbursement.
mean, politically, it would be a mess because you've said, hey, we've raised all this money to make America great, and now you don't have that money anymore.
Right.
So
Well,
you gotta,
that's the whole problem. The whole problem is that Trump's use of the Emergency Powers Act wasn't meant to raise revenue. Right.
Hmm. I
This is
understand, but
this is revenue that Congress never endorsed.
correct. But let's just go along the fantasy. Let's go along the fantasy for a while and say, would the fantasy be completely disrupted? I think it would hurt politically if the court were to rule against him. Do you think the
Oh, certainly.
court's structure, because he appointed three or four, or how do you think his appointees and that situation, do you believe in the purity of the court, meaning that they're going to find a right solution, or do you think it is still a political decision and that's what's going to guide the ultimate decision?
Well, he needs five on the court, and I don't think he's going to get five. So
So who's not going to go?
what?
Who do you think is going to be the Republican?
Who's going to side with Trump? I think it's going to be Alito, definitely. I think it's going to be Kavanaugh, and I think probably Thomas. I think those are the three. So I think it's going to be a 6-3 decision against
So
Trump.
Amy Barrett and the head of the court are both going to go
Roberts.
Roberts.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think it's one of those things on the radar, but I kind of have a question about significance here. I mean, I'm not sure. I think it's politically important and I think it's structurally important that we do the right things and we try to get our allies in a better place. But I guess I'm just not sure I'm going to make a trade in my portfolio based on how the court rules or doesn't rule. Is
I
that
agree with
fair?
you. I agree with you. I think, you know, the market is up today a lot. I think that's uh, you know, mostly due to the fact that it was down yesterday, right? And it's recovering. So I don't know how much of the up I can attribute to the Supreme Court hearing. What the Supreme Court will come up with in this case precisely, I don't know, right? I think it'll strike down the my guess, just my guess. I think it'll strike down the tariffs as they're being implemented now, and maybe provide some guidance as to what kinds of tariffs might be acceptable.
Hmm.
I don't think they'll look, you know, anything like what we've got right now. They won't be as sweeping, and they won't be as uh, they won't they won't provide Trump a tool that he can use in a whimsical fashion like he's been using them now.
Okay.
That's
Well,
that would be my guess as to what's going to happen. So, which I personally think is a good outcome because I think tariffs are a drag on the US economy.
Yeah, I think we both agree that economically tariffs are an inefficient way to do
Yeah.
something. So I don't think we have a disagreement on the fundamentals of tariffs being good or bad. I just have it, I just think it's a case of, is the Supreme Court really the Supreme Court of all the people, or is the Supreme Court the Supreme Court of Trump, which many people are saying, right?
Well, we'll
It's
see.
yeah, and that's
I
what
think
I think is
I
more important almost than what the issue is, or
right.
is how do they vote when
Yeah.
it really comes down to an issue
Right.
that should have
So, so
more
Steve,
legal.
on that point, there have been a number of rulings that have gone in favor of Trump, but a lot of those rulings have been ones where they haven't had oral arguments like this,
Oh,
where they've been basically overturning stays, injunctions by lower courts.
yeah,
So really they're just like let's put a pin in something and discuss it later. Let's hold that for now and we'll discuss it later. Those are the kinds of decisions we've had so far, which are
yeah,
kind of decisions with a lowercase d. This case is a decision with a capital D.
correct.
Birthright citizenship will be a decision with a capital D.
Is that on the
And
next?
when we get around to discussing immigration and National Guard, I think ultimately those will be decisions also with a capital D, because those big decisions. So I think those are the decisions where, we'll really see the true character of the Supreme Court come out. I think in this case, I've already given you my opinion in this case. In the birthright citizenship, I think they're going to rule against Trump. And I also think they're going to have problems with the whole National Guard issue. Uh, we're not talking about the National Guard in this call, but I'll just say that it went up to the Supreme Court, this Illinois case, and Amy Coney Barrett wrote back with a question, which was kind of an interesting question. Like, what do you consider to be regular forces of the United States? And that's in the context of you only call up the National Guard when the regular forces can't achieve what you want to achieve.
Right.
And so there's a question, are the regular forces like the Army and the Navy or the regular forces like ICE, right? And
Yeah,
and
I
I
think
mean,
there's quite a few forces that we're not, and I think we've been working on the fringes, but I think this issue is important with a capital D, but as in terms of our investors out there, I'd say, listen and learn, but I'm not sure your portfolio is going to change one way or another based on this issue. So, do you have any last
I
comments?
agree. I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, everybody, thank you for listening. And we just thought that we'd throw this issue in because it's current, it's happening today, and we want to give you the latest on what's happening in the news and try to understand its relevance to your portfolio and your financial wellness. So thanks everybody for listening, and we appreciate your tuning in, and please share with your friends and family and let us know what we can do to make our podcast better. Thanks again.